All right, everyone. Welcome back to my program. I'm Rashad Bakir. We're talking about college football, of course, and let's talk about opinions and facts. And so I'm going to get into recapping the aftermath of the games last night. That was somewhat crazy, particularly those teams who are trying to get in, or rather back themselves out of the 12-team college football playoff. And this was sort of reminiscent, in a way, of and I'm a lifetime, long time college football fan. And so, even I'm 60 years old, and I've been seeing a lot of college football over the years. But this takes me back to particularly like 98, '01, '07, 14. Um, but in this new era with the 12-team college football playoff, my goodness, I mean, heading into the year, you know, it was all about, okay, yeah, everybody kind of pencil in, okay, this team will make it, this team, and the standard blue bloods, which is sort of typical to fare on how it goes. Just as we look at the rankings every week, it's the same old hats that we're normally used to seeing, logos, and all that stuff, and the new money. Indiana was trying to break through that, and so, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. Um, that was a team that I picked, and I'm going to stand on my own accountability with that. I predicted them to win the game, but if you saw my previous video when I was gave you the keys of the game, because I gave the keys of the game with both teams what they needed to do to win the game. So recapping my keys to the game, it was on the mark about what Ohio State needed to do, would do, could do, etc. So, and they took care of business to that degree, Uh, and as I've talked about taking the punch, and I said Indiana's gonna have to strike first with the first punch because they're gonna get punched in the mouth, and they sure did out the gate when they scored, and how they chewed up clock and so forth. But it wasn't sustainable. They just combobulated themselves out of the game, uncharacteristically, particularly, like I said, with special teams play, the muff fumble punt, obviously the kick return. I said big plays, and sure enough, Ohio State had them, and Indiana didn't. And then it was just mind-boggling. Since I made the prediction with Indiana, let me just kind of go by what they didn't do, they couldn't do in that game. The pass protection coverage, which was like MIA. I mean, I just couldn't understand why they couldn't make an adjustment to what Ohio State was doing in their pass protection, and some kind of check down to get the ball out, and the guys just couldn't get off the ball, and can put any kind of stable drives together, whatsoever. um, and so how the game went. So that's that. And Ohio State, the better team, certainly. I mean, uh, and they did what they needed to do in that game. Um, Now, I want to get into these other games, though, because that's where all the wacky mayhem and melee really starts for us in this college football uh, season, and what we're all anticipating to be a great playoff, uh, uh, you know, season of stuff that which we're anticipating to happen. So, first up on the docket that to go down in flames was Ole Miss, Florida. Ole Miss losing to Florida 24-17. And certainly this game, I know didn't have as many eyeballs on it because a lot of folks was watching the uh, Indiana Ohio State game up until probably about the halftime or something like that. And so, or third quarter, more or less. So so when we look at this Ole Miss situation and the fact that they just are like the tales of two teams, I mean, really, a Jekyll and Hyde team. I mean, my goodness, one week they can play like that and play so great. I'm saying to beat Georgia, and another week they playing like they played and lose to a Florida. Now this was a surging Florida team. This was a Florida team that's got off itself off the mat. You know, that was all predicted to be down for the count at one point and has really re-energized itself. And just sort of took it up to another level once they announced that the coach was coming back, Coach Napier, and so forth, as the Georgia fans like to call him Sunbed Billy, uh, and all that stuff. But anyhow, Florida was game. Florida was ready. Florida did what they had to do, like any team who wins any game will do. They do what they have to do, and that's what it comes down to. Ole Miss didn't look like a team that's ready for the playoffs. A lot of these teams aren't looking like teams that's ready for the playoffs. I mean, put it point blankly. I mean, because we're looking at these teams backing themselves out of these playoffs. So, uncharacteristically, Ole Miss quarterback Jackson Dart throwing consecutive interceptions. And on one plays, it's like first down. It's like, really? And you're throwing it into triple coverage and all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, talking about a team who really like has stumbled and fumbled them way through the year. I mean, when you look at Ole Miss and what they are this year with all of the money they put into NIL to get these players, and this was going to be the year, and it was a year for them beating Georgia for sure. I mean, they showed up for that, But the problem was these other games. Where was they at? Because certainly like I said, what started it all off, because the week prior to Kentucky, they blew the doors off. Like Georgia Tech, and then Wake Forest, excuse me, whatever they went into Wake Forest, and blew the doors off these folks, and then come back at home and what the heck? You lose to Kentucky at home? In the play that you played, and so forth. And then Kentucky, as we see, is the bottom barrel in the SEC right now. And so, but early on, Kentucky was playing tough. I will say this, okay? They're stout defensively, and they did play because Kentucky played Georgia tough as well too. So, I mean, again, a lot of these teams, and let me just reset this part too, are better than what their record says. So again, just like rivalry games, you got to throw records out. So we have to also get out of the business. Those of us who like to talk about college football and get on the videos and everything else, and on TV and everything else, um, talking about what we think we know, we have to get out of and refrain from at times this whole notion of just looking at a team's record and this and that and the other, because again, in this era now with NIL and transfer portals and everything, there's a lot more parity. These teams can get up for that game. Each game is almost like a bowl game, playoff game in and of itself. Because these teams that are playing, especially when you talk about a ranked versus unranked, then that either amps up the everything, the stakes even more, was what I'm saying. And so that's putting pressure in a lot of these programs, these teams. Certainly, you see that. because now they're being treated like pros to where you're getting paid and you're expected to perform at your best each and every week. No excuses. So that is probably a contributing factor to why these teams are cracking the way they are in some sense of it. Because you have 18, 19, 20, 21-year olds and maybe a few other older ones than that, um, who are feeling what 25, 35 sometimes in the NFL players who are full-time football players are under, and so forth. So Ole Miss, like I said, couldn't get out of its own way to not put itself in a position to move up its seat up into the playoffs. So we will all have to see come Tuesday, certainly. Now, so that was the first team to go down in flames on Saturday. The next team after that was Colorado. Colorado was coming in hot too, again on a little win streak. Um, but to lose to another team that was surging, similarly like what Florida was doing, Kansas having knocked off prior to Colorado two ranked teams back to back weekends, Iowa State and then BYU. Then, of course, they knock off Colorado at on a neutral site game. But it was like a home game for them, but neutral site. Uh, and and it was lights out too. I mean, they was lights out. That running back they got, Neil, was just tearing it up. And so Colorado at times was doing what Colorado do, especially on the offensive end with Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders and what have you. But yeah, they certainly didn't bring their A game enough to win that game, of course, because that's what the results show. And like a lot of these teams, again this year, and I state this, are good teams, but there's no great teams out there as of yet that we can see, because all these teams have some kind of flaw to them. And so that's how things are going to look. And that just goes back what I said just moments ago about the parity and about what's happening with the transfer portal, that which has impacted that to where, you know, and money doesn't necessarily buy you championships, as the saying goes. Try the New York Yankees a few times, back in the days of George Steinbrenner, uh, you know, and all that, and other teams we have seen lose, thinking they're going to just get the players, and well, them players got to be able to work together, and a lot of there's the chemistry. There's a lot of things that go into that, selfishness, and all the other stuff that it takes to win a championship and so forth. But so Colorado, um, it's kind of like that when they bring all they shock college football, bringing all these types of transfers in and everything else. And so, but this year, they turned things around. Certainly, they have a much better season than what many people predicted, and they still have a pathway to get to the Big 12 championship game, but they're going to need help, and that's where the problem lies for several of these teams needing the help stuff. So they go down to Kansas. Kansas is looking like a top 10 team right now, to be quite honest with you. And that's how it always goes for some of these teams. They find themselves in the midway point and the ending point of last third or so of the season. And, and you say, man, where was this team at in the beginning of the year? And so forth. So a team like Kansas, they're playing really hot, similarly like Florida, playing pretty hot, uh, and can beat you on any given Saturday right now. So we saw Colorado, the second team to go down. Then BYU, which is only a mild upset because of the fact that Arizona State would also rank, but they would just rank below BYU, and BYU was still considered a favorite in the Big 12 to get to the title game. So um, that and it was upset enough to where the students ran out on the field twice. That is, you know, first time too early because they thought that the time ran out, and that was kind of a crazy situation there. And then they had to kind of save them for later to get them off the field. Much like the next game we're going to talk about, with all these other ones, getting them off the field a little bit too early in the celebrations. And let me just say this too, real quick, about uh, rushing on the field, especially in college football. I love it. I know that in some of these conferences they finding schools and this and that and the other, and the schools don't care because that is really what makes up college football. Now I know there's always the safety concerns that come with when they're running out on the field and all this stuff, but this is a tradition to college football. This is what makes college football so unique, and what those of us who have the passion and love for the game love it so much because especially when you have underdogs, under unsung hero and so forth. We want to relish in those moments, and that pageantry of college football cannot take away, the rushing of the field, and for a lot of these schools, I mean, these are young kids, 99% of them out there running out on the field, a few old folks running too, but mostly, and you just see the when you look out and you see that, it just signatures, like I said, just great moments that these kids are going to remember in their college experience for a lifetime. And so I don't know. I just hope that the darn NCAA police or somebody, doesn't start clamping down to enforce it, to a degree that it takes it away. Again, the NFL, the no fun league up there, you don't see that kind of thing, in the professional ranks. And so, and I know that college football is quasi professional at this point now, with the players getting paid so much and all this other stuff. But the college experience of teams, fans running on the field is a must see, must watch, must have for college football, because it just sets the stage up for, like I said, just a beautiful thing when we see these upsets, like, as we do, and so forth. So that's my 2 cents on that. Now let me keep it moving with the rest of these games. So next, after we saw BYU go down, then it gets later in the evening. Well, before that, hold on. Let me before we get to that, because we had a couple of games where there was some almost upsets. So we still in the afternoon, at least my time, West Coast time, afternoon, whereby we had Illinois in a most unorthodox way of winning the game, to say the least, or at least not. It was planned in the script so much. So they were going to, as the story goes, they were going to take a field goal. Then the Illinois coach, excuse me, the Rutgers coach called the timeout, and then Illinois, smart as a coach is, says, "Okay, we're just gonna go for it on first, fourth down." And lo and behold, what happens? They end up scoring a touchdown with like 4 seconds left, and there you go, ball game. So they escape an upset from Rutgers, winning that game 38-31. Um, there you go with that one. Then, of course, we all had Penn State nearly getting upset by, and that would have been a big one too, to Minnesota. But Minnesota is another one of these teams that at times plays really good enough to beat a lot of teams. I'm going to say, I'm saying anybody, but uh, to play. And then because that game that Minnesota lost to Rutgers, I believe, was a head scratcher in and of itself. I don't know how the heck they lost that game, but anyway, but they escaped with a 1 point victory over Minnesota. That is Penn State, I'm talking about. And Penn State again is another one of these teams that which team is showing up. I mean, how good are they really? Kind of thing. Like with some of these teams, like again, it's a week to week assessment with these teams. Uh, like I said, um, then of course the third game that was a near miss upset was Boise State with in their crazy game. What was that, Wyoming? What the heck happened there? So so Boise State escapes with a 4-point win there in their game, 17-13, nearly won. Now, moving to the later night games. So again, another top 10 team goes down, Alabama. Now, this was a game that I had an eye on as a potential upset from get-go. Because looking at that schedule, and this goes back to the preseason, and all, Alabama fans were worried about this game, heading into the season. That is, I'm talking about. Because of course OU first year in the SEC, like Texas, their former Big 12 brother, and they're playing that game late in the year, right before Alabama's biggest rival game, and so uh, people was like, well, how's that game? Is that a trap game? What kind of game? Well, it certainly was a trap game, and then some, for sure. A game that not only was a trap game, but a game that what we are thinking, most of us, that this has knocked Alabama out the playoff picture. But we'll see, because like I said, with the other scenarios of these other teams, who knows where teams are going to be in these rankings come in a couple of days now. So we'll see that. But yeah, Alabama though just looked the worst they didn't played all year. I mean, you can't even cover that up. I mean, they just didn't show up at all. Did the real Alabama team get left in Tuscaloosa somewhere? Did they get kidnapped on the highway somewhere? Because that team that showed up in Norman, Oklahoma last night was not an Alabama team that we recognize at all. That's for sure. I mean, and it was a controversial play in that game. Everybody has seen now, at least probably be aware of the sort of mysterious flag and what was the penalty and all that. So, but even if you give them those points on that touchdown, that was a heck of a play by that freshman Williams. Alabama still wasn't winning that game. Let's just be clear about that. Even if you give them the touchdown, it made it look the score a little bit better, but the beatdown was in and of itself. Now Oklahoma and are no world beaters themselves. Okay, let's be clear about them because they were stumbling, fumbling. I mean, that game could have been like 38-3. If because Oklahoma had opportunities to score early on and they couldn't. They had the little trick play, which was a great play call. The guy was wide open. And his alligator arm self couldn't catch the darn ball. First of all, the throw was kind of a wobbler, little wounded duck. And then maybe that threw him off or something. I don't know. But you still could have had caught that. I mean, his grandmother could have caught that ball. Uh, it was like his hand, it's just like they just crossed up so bad, and the guy just you know didn't catch the ball. As we all see. So that's a touchdown that wasn't had. And then, like I said, they other plays, the guy missed a field goal and stuff and opportunities to score. So, like I said, Oklahoma wasn't necessarily coming in this game like they was world beaters and some top 10 team either. But they played enough to win that game, and their defense is really what carried them for sure. Because obviously, by only giving up 3 points on the scoreboard, uh, that shows a lot. And they really neutralized uh, Melrose, who, like I said, just a week or 2 or 3 weeks ago was just looking like the next coming of something, Lamar Jackson there for a moment at times. And Uh, and again, that is what you get with Melrose. At times he can play like Lamar Jackson and the greats, and then in others he is a stumbling, bumbling quarterback. Now his mo, how I have profiled him, is his comfort sweet spots are under 20 throws, somewhere between 17 and 20 is his sweet spots. He is not a stand in the pocket quarterback going to throw the chuck it down 25, 30, 40 times and all that. He's throwing it 40 times. That's some problems right there. Uh, anything past 30, north of 30, it's ridiculous. Uh, and what have you. That's not his game. So, Bama goes down to OU 24-3. And then, of course, the late night game we had, the one that was shortly thereafter, that one was Auburn beating Texas A&M in a four-time overtime thriller, 43-41. Texas A&M, again, another game that some folks marked as another type of upset alert game. And sure enough, it was Auburn pulling what they usually do every now and then to Alabama. I guess they must have thought that Alabama was coming in there uh, uh, disguised as Texas A&M or something, because they came out of the gate, put a whipping on them, 21 nothing, and then it was like, okay. Then when as Texas A&M was creeping back into that game, then it was like, here we go. Auburn figured out who they really are. And then it was like, oh man, they're going to lose the game. They had a lead. And it's been a crazy, tumultuous year with Auburn, anyhow, uh, with their coach, Hugh Freeze, uh, and so forth. But they pulled out a game, like I said, like usually you catch them because there's some ghost or something up in that stadium where a lot of things unpredictably happen over there with them beating teams that they generally aren't the favorites to win these games with, as many teams in the SEC know. Alabama, Georgia, now Texas A&M, LSU, and a few other ones. Okay, they got a bunch of dead bodies of games with tombstones with folks in classic games that we've seen over the years there. So Texas A&M tombstone is going to be buried over there in the yard too, um, going in as a heavy favorite, as a ranked team, and leaving uh, scratching their heads on what happened. So now what we need to look at is does the college football playoff rankings, if you're going to call them, or seedings, because it's rankings on one hand and seedings on another hand. So, however it goes, there's going to be a lot of shakeup. Obviously, the first four, standard fare: Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State. We can all cement that in. Okay. Uh, then I would probably say to look forward to Notre Dame moving up. I mean, Notre Dame has been punishing teams left and right um, in their streak since that debacle against Northern Illinois. Again, another team that must have got kidnapped on the way to the game somehow, and because that was a head structure of unbelievable proportions for sure. So, um, so Notre Dame is clicking on all cylinders, playing really good, like many had expected them to, looking at their schedule and everything, especially early on. Everybody was penciling them in undefeated, going and finishing the year. Now they do have a rival game, a bi-coastal rivalry game against Southern Cal. So Southern Cal has gotten their legs the last couple of weeks, playing a lot much better with the change of quarterback situation. But do they have enough to beat a juggernaut in Notre Dame? I don't know, because the game that they played against their crosstown rival UCLA wasn't nothing to brag about either. I mean, only to put up about 19 points or something like that, under 20 points, um, and so forth. So I don't know if that's not going to be enough to beat no Notre Dame. That's for sure. They're going to have to score like 30, and they haven't shown they can do that other than beating these old Sisters of the Poor teams that they played early in the season. So we haven't seen them score nothing past 30 something points or whatever the case may be. And I mean, significantly, I'm saying, they had the overtime game and with Penn State and what have you. But nonetheless, Notre Dame's going to be favored. Notre Dame is expected because they know what's on the line for that game. So I'll get to my predictions on another video. But right now, yeah, just kind of going through my preview to what I anticipate to be for Tuesday. I'm just going primarily top 10 for right now. And then after Notre Dame, who will be likely number 5, then that's where it kind of gets a little bit. You can move this team here, move that team there. Does Georgia catapult itself all the way up to number 6? Or does Miami stay at number 6? Miami, again, is another one of these wishy-washy teams that's been, fighting on life support in some of these games. And that terrible loss they had. I mean, when you look at the losses, because now we're getting into teams with L's on their record, then it's like, okay, who has the best loss or the worst loss? And so by comparison now, Georgia's 2 losses, okay, are better than Miami's 1 loss. Okay, just to put that. And if they played, and that's how I go by. I look at, well, these teams 2 played. Who do you think will win? I'm an eyeball test guy, so I'm looking at stuff to where I'm looking at if those 2 teams played, who would you pick in that game? Simple enough, head to head, and so forth. And Georgia, I would pick against Miami, and a few other ones that's in there, SMU, um, you know, on down the line. Um, so yeah, so I would have Georgia. I mean, I wouldn't even mind Georgia if Georgia's number 5, but again, they got 2 losses, so you got to give props to Notre Dame. So they're gonna be 5. I would be my 5 team. Georgia 6, then Miami. Um, I would say, far as that goes, and then it's anybody's ball game. Tennessee could move up, back up into that thing. So it doesn't really necessarily matter per se as far as where they're gonna go because we still got another week or so of games. So but I would certainly have Tennessee up there for sure because they're going to finish likely with 2 losses and sitting pretty because they're going to be in a position possibly to host the game. So as it might turn out, they certainly have to beat uh, their rival, in-state rival, Vanderbilt next week, excuse me, next year. But yeah, that too. But and then as I said, so we will see how it goes with the remainder teams in the back end um, and so forth. And the likelihood, possibly there might be one little squeaky 3-loss team uh, at the back end, but they probably won't make it based upon the way this thing going, and so forth. And because you got like I say, a bunch of also rans in the back end there. So I'm looking at here, got uh, Clemson could move up in that 12, 13. Boise State survived, so they'll move all up quite a bit in this. Where does Indiana go? You see, that's where the unknown thing for this situation is. Where does Indiana fall to? Um, do they take a deep dive or do they just go down to somewhere? I mean, I would put them somewhere in 9-ish, 8, 9-ish and with the ideal of them not falling out of the playoff picture. So I would put them somewhere around 8 or 9 ish. Um, yeah, they lost, but they lost to again a top ranked team, number two team. So you can't necessarily drop them that far because they was on the road. They did play competitively for a period of time, very competitively for a period of time, and dominantly in a sense at the beginning of the game. I mean, scoring right away. They had a fourth down stop in the red zone, which I talked about as keys in the game, red zone scoring, and all that stuff. So, like I said, you know, Indiana is not like as if they're the old Indiana. And what we're going by in the eyeball test of today, they are still deserving of being in the playoff for one, certainly. And you can't just discount one loss and start jumping and putting a bunch of two-loss teams ahead of them as a result of who they lost to on the stage to which they lost that game. So for my money on the matter, as far as well, my money, but my thoughts on the matter more so than anything, is that Indiana, yes, they're gonna take a dip, but I wouldn't say significantly. I would, like I said, I mean, I would even have them at 7 or something. No, like I said, yeah, 7. I would put Georgia as a top two loss team, moving them up, because again, uh, how they lost, who they lost. I mean, it's so carnivalish, trying to figure out whose loss is worse than the other loss to which teams and all this other stuff. Georgia lost 2 games on the road to two teams at the time, top 25 teams, certainly. So, they will be, but I'm comfortable either way with all that stuff. I'm not gonna make a horse hair over these stuff until we get to the last weekend. But certainly, my thing is I want to advocate for Indiana. Now, last point before I get off of this thing is going into that game. Here's something I didn't mention earlier, but we're going. I was doing conspiratorial thinking that what if Ohio State wanted to keep the game close, even though they were doing, they knew they would be winning the game. But what if they wanted to keep the game close that would help their Big Ten brother in Indiana so that they don't fall off the map out of the rankings? So that helps the Big Ten get 4 teams strong into the playoff because the Big Ten is looking very good for themselves with Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, and Indiana in the bunch, while the SEC is the one who's taking the biggest hit. I mean, they're looking at, for the most part, shoot, 2, 3 teams. I mean, people have said what would happen if in the SEC championship, the two-loss team that would be there at the time, they were thinking Alabama would lose that game and then fall out because it was the ideal is that, well, there won't be a 3-loss team in the playoff. Well, now what about Georgia? So Georgia is likely going to have a rematch game in their regular season matchup with Texas. If in SEC championship game, if that holds true, and then Georgia, let's say, loses that game, now they have 3 losses. Does Georgia fall out as a 3-loss team? So that's going to be real interesting. How will the playoff panel look at that? Because you're talking about Georgia, and that would be a game. Well, that's tied. That well, each one beat them. So you're not going to judge that game differently, like as if they didn't play, and then on neutral site and all this other stuff. So I don't believe Georgia will get heavily penalized by losing the SEC champion game to Texas. Now they might if it's Texas A&M because they're likely going to be ranked ahead of Texas A&M for one, and be the favorite for that game. Um, so there they would take a stumble that might put them on nervous street. But if they were to lose to Texas, uh, which I don't know if Texas can beat Georgia, be honest with you, but we'll get there when we get there if we find out those are two teams playing for the conference championship. Um, but that's going to make all for interesting play once we get to this thing and all the fun stuff. So we'll see how it all shakes out coming up here. So anyway, I'm gonna get off this thing and appreciate you listening in to my channel and all that fun stuff. You have a good weekend out there, and I will check with you again very soon. Very much. Thank you.